we're going to go ahead and get started. It's 9 and I do want to keep us on time. Hope that the conference has been enjoyable and for the first day, and that the networking dinner was great last night. You got a chance to meet some of the other participants here at the conference. My name is Ron Nixon. I am a vice president for news, overseeing investigations, enterprise, partnerships, and grants at the AP. And it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. So allow me to introduce Charlie Beckett, who's president, not president, but we can elevate you. Professor in the Department of Media and Communications at the London School of Economics. He's the rector of the London School of Economics International Journalism think tank, Polis, and he currently leads the Polis LSE at London School of Economics Journalism and AI project, which is what the subject of his keynote is today. And previously, Charlie worked for over 2 decades as a journalist with organizations such as the BBC and ITN. So he's just a brief overview. He's going to talk about how newsrooms can and should be used using AI to improve and expand their work. I know that there are a number of organizations around the world, news organizations, including my own, that have AI projects, and I'm anxious to hear what Charlie has to say this morning. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Charlie.
Morning. Well done, all of you that are here. I'm impressed by that because it was a really wonderful networking dinner last night. And I'm very, very pleased to be here. It's an extraordinary gathering. I arrived yesterday, and I'm a bit blown away by the number of people, the variety of people, and the extraordinary talent that is gathered here. It is quite an amazing conference. As Ron says, I'm somebody who worked in journalism for 2 decades, very much in the analog era, and for the last 15 years I've been at the London School of Economics running this journalism think tank and working with people around the world to try and find out where the profession is going, where news is going, where journalism is going, and a lot of that is to do with technology. But of course, as we've heard from the people here, technology is just one element in the way that journalism is evolving. So I will be talking about artificial intelligence today, but please don't ask me any complicated technological questions because that's not my expertise. My expertise is very much from the what difference does it make to journalism perspective, and that's what I'm going to try and be talking about today. It's really exciting to be here. As I say, I used to be a journalist, and about 20 years ago when I was at the BBC, I won an award. And the prize of the award was to spend 3 months at Oxford University researching journalism. And for some reason, the BBC had just decided to launch something on what was then called the internet. This was a new idea of the internet. The BBC had just created something called BBC Online. And I thought, well, that sounds quite kind of groovy, you know, this online thing. It will probably never catch on, but I ought to find out about it. And so I decided to come to Uganda, in fact. I thought I'll go to Uganda to find out how all this digital stuff is changing journalism. And so I spent 3 months in Uganda back in, I think, 1998, researching how the internet might impact. And what I found out was that, in fact, there wasn't much happening with the internet in Uganda in 1998, although there were some newsrooms who were starting to experiment with it. They were starting to look at what other people were doing around the world online, because of course, you know, the basic point about the internet is that we can do that. And so it's very interesting to be back here, if you like, 25 years later, to see how that transformed, how the internet transformed journalism around the world. And when I'm going to be talking about artificial intelligence. Should we get the slides up? Yep, get the slides up, lovely. Then I'm going to be thinking about it in that sense, that is, for me, artificial intelligence is a kind of third wave. We had that first wave that started back over 2 decades ago when we took our journalism online. Then there was a kind of second wave about perhaps 15 years ago when social media arrived and we started using Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp, and just yesterday listening to people how they're doing their journalism on those networks as well. And then you get this, I think, this third wave, this bundle of technologies that we use, this umbrella term at least, of artificial intelligence. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to try and explain what I'm doing with this journalism AI project at LSE, because everything I'm going to be talking about is very much drawn from what we've discovered through that project working with newsrooms around the world. I'm going to talk a little bit about how AI can support journalism, because it doesn't exist on its own. There's no AI newsroom, there's only newsrooms that use AI. And then I'm going to talk about what you should be thinking about when you think about using AI in your journalism, and then perhaps a little bit about where this thing is going in the future as well. So I'm going to try and race through all that stuff and have time to talk at the end. You're probably well aware of the sort of technological innovations. We keep reading stories about robots, and we keep reading stories about things like this incredible text generation, the DALL-E project, and it's always described as a kind of a breakthrough and a transformative technology, and it's great fun. It's great fun to look at these things and think about how clever it is that they've managed to come up with these kind of innovations. But generally speaking, AI in newsrooms is quite boring, I'm afraid, in the sense of the actual technology. There are no robots. There is no sort of 2001 Space Odyssey computer that can genuinely think for itself. Generally speaking, AI performs very repetitive, predictive, data-driven tasks at great speed and at great scale. But it's what we can do with those tools and systems that matters. And AI in journalism is really important because of that characteristic, that it's very diverse. You can use it in so many different ways. It's as diverse in a sense as the journalism that we practice. And in that sense, we have to sort of think differently about it. AI impacts on all stages of journalism. I know most people here are at the sharp end. You're doing fantastic investigative journalism, you're creating scoops, you're producing revelations, but even to do that, there has to be a whole structure, doesn't there? There has to be the news gathering at the beginning, identifying where the data is, where the stories are, and then right at the end, there's the audience, because you don't want to create your journalism if nobody reads it or watches it or listens to it. And AI is absolutely part of that. Yes, it does replace some of the work that journalists do, but I've never really seen an instance where a robot, so-called, has somehow replaced somebody's job. But yes, it does some of the work in the same way that technology replaces the work that I used to do. I used to do my research by going to a cuttings library and getting little envelopes of newspaper cuttings so that I could find out about stuff. And that has been replaced, of course, by things like search, Google search, for example. And AI, generally speaking, works in the same way. It, generally speaking, does stuff that humans could do, but it's very boring, or it does stuff at scale and or at speed that humans couldn't do, but it's always augmenting the editorial processes. It's very rarely completely replacing them. But it does mean that you're going to get new products, new tools, new services that add to what you are doing right now. It also has some very specific applications. For example, something like Trint, you know, the tool that you can use to transcribe audio to text. Or it can be very systemic. It can help manage your subscription system, for example. And there is this huge variation, and with variation also comes a huge amount of inequality. And this is one of the things that my project's trying to address, is that we're not all equal in the face of AI technologies. There'll be big organizations like Ron's AP, you know, who have got the money, frankly, and the scale and the expertise and the experience and the people to be able to take this technology and do really exciting, significant things. And then there'll be smaller organizations, which is most of us, you know, around 50 or fewer people, who don't have those resources. And that can be vary according to your size or where you are in the world or the kind of organization that you are. So that's really important. Of course, it differs according to different markets and cultures. And really importantly, especially somewhere like South Africa, according to languages. The AI technology is still largely developed and based on, luckily for me anyway, English. You know, but obviously that's changing over time. Just a quick rattle through some of the things it's used for. I'm not going to go into these case studies in detail, partly because there are so many people in this room, actually, who know more about the actual application of AI, and they can talk about how they've done it. But this is just to stress that point I'm making, that it's no good. Doesn't matter where you work in your organization. You can't say, oh, that's not part of my life, or that's not going to be part of my work. It is. It doesn't matter whether you work in news gathering, like these examples, the Reuters using, like AP, a huge organization, processing vast amounts of stories every day, vast amounts of data, and they are using AI to automate the way that they monitor what's happening in the world. Also news production. Again, perhaps one of the sort of sexier ideas is the idea of writing news stories. Again, generally, it's really good fun to experiment with that, but most of the news writing that goes on is actually quite dull things like the weather report or football scores. You know, when I worked on a newspaper back in the analog days, I remember typing in football results. You know, I'm a beautifully educated person, you know, with a further degree, and you know, I'm a talented creative journalist, and I was typing in football results. You know, let the machine do that. But also news production. I don't know if you're familiar with the Ukrainian organization Texty, who did this fantastic investigation into illegal amber mining. This was at a time when Ukrainians could concentrate on investigative journalism rather than conflict journalism. But this extraordinary story about how they used satellite imagery and they used AI to process where the illegal amber mines were, and they were able to map that and do stories about it. And I think that's, you know, very much the cutting edge for many people here using AI in investigative news production. But the distribution bit, I think, is incredibly important. We now have amazing amounts of data, don't we? Even if it's just the people subscribing to your newsletter, for example. We have incredible data about our audiences, and surely we should be using that data, partly, yes, to make sure we make money. working out how we can convert people into subscribers, for example, working out where people are, to do this really important task of giving people the news they want in the format they want at the time they want, so that they can optimize their enjoyment of our wonderful journalism. Very, very difficult to do manually, but again, these technologies of machine learning and so on can help us to do that, to optimize our relationship with the audiences that we're trying to serve. So you can see, it all works at different levels, all different parts, and therefore it is systemic, it is structural. And here's a kind of list of all the different specific ways that AI can impact on journalism. It's a pretty random list. I'm sure other people can think of other uses. But I think, I'm just trying to stress here the variety of applications. And this is why I think I'll be very surprised if there's anybody in this room who can't think of some way that these technologies might have some sort of beneficial impact on their work. And some of it, as I say, is very boring, frankly. This is stuff you don't necessarily want to do, but some of it is right at the cutting edge. I was listening to fantastic fact-checking talk yesterday. I mean, how on earth can you cope with the volume and speed of disinformation and bots online unless you have some sort of technological help? And investigations, well, this is just stolen from the website for this conference. I just sort of randomly looked at some of the things that people are going to be talking about, and I can see a role for artificial intelligence technologies in all of these things. They're all really exciting and important editorial projects, missions, and I can see a role in all of them. I mean, obviously the metaverse for journalism. Does the metaverse even exist? I don't know. But artificial intelligence certainly does and can help us to do that journalism. So now I'm going to do if you like, the bit that's about my work, which is this journalism AI project, which has been working since 2018. And I'm going to talk you through that. And it's not just because I would love you to join it and benefit from it, but also it's my way of trying to talk about how AI works for journalists. And everything I'm going to be talking about will be based on what journalists have said to us and done with us during this period. I should say that I work for the London School of Economics. The project is hosted at my think tank Polis, and it's funded by those lovely, lovely people at the Google News Initiative. We started off in 2018 doing this research report called New Powers and New Responsibilities, which was a survey of how AI is being used in newsrooms around the world. We talked to people in about 70, I think, different countries around the world, and we asked them, what are you doing? But we also asked them, why aren't you doing it? What's stopping you doing it? And what are the problems that you face when you do it? And the problems are, practical problems, but they're also ethical problems, for example. We're very conscious, aren't we, of the problem around bias in many of these technologies and data that we have to be aware of. And we use that report to work out, well, okay, what would be helpful to journalists around the world when they're trying to understand it. And the big one at the beginning was a kind of knowledge and skills gap. So a gap in the sense of we don't have enough people in newsrooms who understand the tech, data scientists, for example, computer scientists, those kind of people, or those kind of skills, but also more generally, that if this thing is going to impact on everyone's work at some point, then we all need to know a little bit about it, so that we can do our journalism as well as we can in the context of having AI in our newsrooms. So we try to create training programs, very short, and by the way, everything of this is free and accessible online. So we tried to create some training programs that were designed by journalists for journalists, people working in newsrooms, to do things like introduce them to the idea of, what is machine learning. And these have been incredibly popular. I think the machine learning courses had like 50,000 people have taken it. It's just a short, I think it takes a couple of hours to complete. So we tried to bridge that gap. And key to it as well was the idea that we're trying to create a network of people who can help each other and learn from each other. So one of the big things we did was this rather groovy resource which listed all the sort of articles but also case studies about journalism and AI. So you can go on to the website, and if you're interested in a particular thing, I don't know, investigative journalism or transcriptions or something, you can find the resources in terms of articles and case studies of other people who have already started on that journey. And of course, that will save you time and might inspire you as well. And that idea of learning from each other was important to another strand of our project, which was this collaborative exploration of new uses of AI. So what we did was basically every year we have little teams of people who come to us. They say, hey, I'm interested in something to do with AI, and we team them up with people from other newsrooms and sometimes from other countries, as you'll see. And they work, a few hours a week, they work online, remotely, in little teams with our support. We provide them mentorship, we even provide them a bit of tech help or a bit of money, and they will investigate. They'll look at a particular use, and some of them have been very technical, like, this one. How can you use AI to build audience engagement and loyalty? Quite a kind of granular, gritty, important thing. Other people have looked at more, more sort of bigger ideas. So one team looked at the idea of how can you use AI to counter bias, gender bias in your own journalism. So a more kind of ethical project as well. And again, all this stuff, all their work has been published online in reports so that people who are interested in that, can learn from what other people have done before them. As I mentioned, there's this huge problem around inequalities around AI. So again, the project has very much moved towards a focus on smaller newsrooms. We're connecting the big newsrooms with the smaller newsrooms as well. That's really interesting. But we're trying to bridge the inequalities. So we have set up, we did it last year in what we call EMEA, Europe, Middle East and Africa. We brought a bunch of people together to do the AI Academy for small newsrooms. This year we've run it in the APAC region and the Americas region. And basically this is a 10-week course where people spend, from small newsrooms, spend a few hours every week doing an online course with incredibly talented mentors, people who are experts in particular fields, and they do workshops with those journalists, helping to introduce them to the idea of AI tech, but also trying to help them to think through how that might apply to their newsrooms. And I'm personally really, really passionate about this one, because when I go around the world, yes, it's marvelous. Bloomberg is fantastic, the BBC is wonderful, Deutsche Welle, AP, all these big organizations are doing amazing things. But I look around, a conference like this is just a perfect example, and I see so many interesting digital native editorial enterprises happening. And I think those are very much the future of journalism, and where a lot of the most interesting work is being done. So we're really keen to try and learn from those small newsrooms and also to support them as much as we can. So that's our Small Newsroom Academy. Excuse me. We've also created, and we're very pleased with this, this is our AI Journalism Starter Pack. And it's basically a Google document, really, but with links. But the idea is, again, you can go to this, and it contains all the different resources that we've managed to pull together. So if you are starting to explore AI, this is a really good place to begin. You can find very basic stuff, and then you can go on a journey to find more sophisticated resources and ideas for getting started and then moving on. And it's interactive because obviously everybody has a different pathway on this, and we're trying to reflect that. So if you look at what our CoLab fellows, this is from last year, our CoLab challenges. Again, go and read the things yourself, it's all online. But again, I'm trying to stress here the variety of it. As I mentioned, some of these are quite kind of political, if you like. The political misogynistic discourse monitor, which was basically trying to automate monitoring the content of news websites to tell whether you were using enough female sources and images, for example. And that was really fascinating because, of course, as you were all conscious, image recognition of any sort is always going to be quite imperfect. So it's quite an interesting editorial task for them to make that work. And other things, just very, very practical things, using AI for making podcasts and on-demand radio to make that more accessible for people. A very granular, very direct, useful application of the technology. And all those are online. I'm just going to pick on one. Currently we've got teams, I think we've got 10 teams, is it? How many? Over 10 teams working at the moment from all around the world in little groups. And again, just to give you a flavour, and you can find all this stuff online, they've all just published progress reports on what they've been doing this year. And again, you can see that these are, very varied applications. Some of them are, frighteningly complicated. There's this one, for example, which indeed involves some people from South Africa, for example. This is a really nice combination. You've got The Guardian in the UK, and you've got a Dutch organisation working with a South African organisation. And they are getting on very well, honestly. And they are really interested, obviously, in a very important investigative journalism tasks, trying to find evidence of corruption by looking across long-form texts and huge databases. And this one, is very technical. You probably can't see the flow chart at the top, but that is the kind of level of expertise that they're bringing to this. And it's not about the technology in the sense that they're not trying to compete with Google or OpenMind or something to advance the tech itself. We don't pretend that we're somehow a technological research project at all. We are all about the application. We're all about how does this translate, how does this support better journalism itself. So all these projects have editorial people. I mean, they're mainly editorial people. They're not tech people as such. So they're completely focused on what is the potential editorial outcome of this work. And they will be publishing their results in the next month or so. So just to sort of wrap up with some sort of broader thoughts, the one thing is, I'm very enthusiastic about this bunch of technologies because I see a bunch of people doing incredible work with it, but it's really important to remember that this is not some sort of miracle thing. I mean, you all know from your experience of being online, of using social media, that there are certain things that work wonderfully, but they can also bring with them problems. And that there are so many issues in your working lives that have got nothing to do with AI or technology at all. It's problems of politics or economics or just physical practicalities of doing your work. AI can be complicated. You just saw that last diagram. AI can be complicated and it can be hard to implement in your particular newsroom. So I'm not pretending that this is something that you just pick up and plug in and move on. We always think that the human should be in the loop. And we mean that. We mean that as editorial people, or whatever you are, marketing or whatever people in a newsroom, you should be thinking about, why would we even, what's the problem that we're trying to solve here? But also then keep the human in the loop afterwards. Again, you don't just plug these things in and let them do their work. As I say, many, if not most of the problems you face aren't to do with AI, but that human touch, the judgment that you have, the creativity that you have, the imagination, and I think perhaps more importantly, the empathy that you have, your human understanding of your journalism, I would argue that that actually becomes more important. As you worry less about doing some of those boring, repetitive tasks that the AI can do for you, well, what's going to make you stand out as journalists? It's going to be the human element. It's going to be your ability to spot a story, your commitment to your investigations, your understanding of your audience. Those very human things are going to be the things, paradoxically, that will actually matter most. And my last thing, why AI matters, if you like, even if you're not going to use it, and you are, of course, already using it, often without even realizing, but even if you're not going to use AI in your journalism particularly, you need to know about it. Some of you, and there's some brilliant people at this conference, are reporting on AI. They're looking at how it affects not just journalism, of course, but the wider world. Increasingly, everything we do will have some element, or potentially have some element of AI in it. Everything from security, of course, but right through to retail and banking and transport, and indeed our politics is going to be increasingly enabled by artificial intelligence technologies. So as journalists who pretend to understand the world, surely we need to know enough about these things so that we can report on that world properly. One of the things we do, there's a lot of resources on our project trying to help people to think strategically about AI. Now, obviously some of you may, you may think of yourself as an investigative reporter. You're not worried about management and strategy and the business model and all that stuff. But I think even for people like you are part of a structure, and you should be involved and part of any strategy that your organization adopts to AI. I should say, when we did the report back in 2018-19, we asked people, do you have a strategy for AI at your news organization? No. We don't actually have a strategy for anything. And I think that's quite a journalistic thing, that it's quite a kind of ad hoc industry in many levels. So when I say you need to have an AI strategy, I think I just mean think it through before you do it. And there are very simple steps. We've got lots of resources online to help people to do this. But because it's going to have a systemic influence on your organization, potentially, you need to think about it in a more strategic way. And finally, please join us. It's not going to be as beautiful as this conference, but because it's online. But every year we do this Journalism AI Festival. This year, 7th, 8th of December. It's all online. You have to register for it, but it's all free and accessible. And over these 2 days, the people who have been doing those collaborative fellowships with us are going to be presenting their work. And we're also going to be having panels where we talk about the implications of AI and the future of AI in journalism as well. So you're all invited to that, and please, sign up. We've got a newsletter that goes out every couple of weeks. Again, if you sign up for that, you'll get loads of information about what we're doing, but about AI more generally. And as usual, we've got the usual social media platforms as well. So thank you very much for listening to me just now. Feel free, I'm going to be around for the next day or two as well. So come up to me and talk to me if you wish. And tell me what you're doing, what you're thinking about AI. But happy now to take questions. Thanks. Is this one?
Okay, there we go. Okay, so we're going to take questions, and I would keep your questions succinct, please, because I do want to keep us on time. So, gentleman here.
Thank you, Professor, for the insightful presentation. My name is Tole Rafikru from Ethiopia. I work for Code for Africa. My question is, earlier you've said that artificial intelligence could bridge inequalities, but from practice, I think to the contrary, because artificial intelligence, for example, in Ethiopia, yesterday I tried to access one of the open AI as part of one of the session, but I couldn't. The reason was that the tool is not accessible in Ethiopia for some reason. Probably it might work with our political system or policy of the government, or because in the closed societies like in Ethiopia, how can artificial intelligence bridge inequalities? Otherwise, if there is no other interventions that could facilitate inequalities, that is my worry, my concern, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. It's my fault. I meant the opposite. I agree with you completely. I meant that we should try to bridge inequalities, and I was hoping that in some small way that's what we're trying to do with this project. But I agree with you profoundly that first of all there are inequalities anyway. We know that, and when a new technology like this comes along, sometimes it actually highlights those inequalities, doesn't it? It actually makes us much more aware of them. And I know, the work at Code for Africa is extraordinary. You guys know much more about this tech than I do, and the work you're doing is extraordinary. So I know that you know the potential, at least, of this, and that makes it even more frustrating, doesn't it? I think there are also, though, inequalities within the technology itself. Then that shouldn't stop us from trying to use it. But I think that we can see that there are inequalities built into the technology itself. I mean, who owns the technology, for example? It's a bunch of mainly corporations in America that are developing this technology because they have the money and the motive to do so. And we need to be aware of that, There are inequalities built into the technology because of the bias within the data sets. Many of the data sets that this technology is built on, as you know, is biased in itself. It's data sets that are skewed towards white people, for example, skewed towards men. And many of the developers of these technologies are also white men in America. And so that will, in a sense, always infect the way that these technologies are developed. And I think one of the most heartening things has been over the last few years where the AI ethics debate has caught fire. And a lot of it is about that kind of technical inequality. But I think your case study, if you like, your example is really important. Yeah, this technology is great, but I've got a power cut, or I'm not allowed to use it, you know. So I think, and that's precisely what we're trying to, investigate with this project. And there are no solutions. If there were easy solutions to this, then there wouldn't be inequality more generally in the world. And we live in a very unequal world. Yeah, but thank you also for your question and also for your work at Code for Africa.
Yeah, Sam Sol from Amabungani in South Africa. I mean, it's a follow-up question from the one before. Are there initiatives to try and create some kind of open access machine because I think for most journalists it's about managing big data sets and looking for patterns and connections. Nothing that we've come across really does that very easily, and it's there's a lot of tailor making that has to happen. Are there any initiatives to kind of create something that is flexible, that is accessible, as a public resource?
Yeah, again, I think this is a problem that applies to any kind of new technology that comes along, and I wouldn't pretend that there's a sort of easy solution. One of the problems is simply that there are so many applications. The idea that, some things like transcription, for example, tools like that, we can see those and we can apply them easily off the shelf. But so many are specific, and you stressed the important bit about it. It's often the database is the key thing. And the point about it is that you are increasingly building your databases yourself through your journalism, through your audiences and so on. And that's going to be very important, who owns those databases and who has access to them. And I think people tell me that there's a bit of a conflict here, that some of the open access tools just aren't good enough. And that the incentive, the lovely incentive of capitalism, which is you develop tools that are super good and you then spend money to keep updating them and to modernize them, means that that's quite hard to do through open access. So the answer to your question is, there are lots of people working on open access systems, but even if there are, you mentioned the tailoring bit. I think it's that last, what do we call it, the last mile of any application of AI that is actually the harder bit. And I think that's where the effort needs to go. But yeah, tell me about it. If you know of any, tell me. Yeah, that's a really important issue. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Charlie. Hi, Garance Burkup here from AP. I wanted to talk to you about the application of AI in detecting deep fakes. Often we see that in the US midterms, for instance, it's sort of a whack-a-mole situation where one altered video will pop up and there'll be some debunks of that particular video, and then the news cycle will continue. I wondered if you'd seen any particularly good collaborations that would scale the detection of deep fakes for what we will no doubt see going forward as many different countries across the world confront elections in this age of disinformation.
Short answer is I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to go and look on, our case study base. But I think it's a classic. The deep fake is a classic issue in a way, in that both in terms of how we should be worried about it, but perhaps also how it's kind of been hyped. It's a classic example of the kind of technology race, if you like, between bad actors and good actors. And I think in a sense it's been hyped because it's very visual. We can see those incredible videos where, you know, Barack Obama is made to sing songs or something, you know, and it is deeply disturbing. On the other hand, indeed, as you're indicating, the fix to it is probably technological as well. So there's a kind of arms race going on. I suspect, though, that the wider context of around elections, for example, of misinformation is probably more serious. I'm not so sure that an individual deep fake will have a particularly profound impact in the sense that if you have a deep fake of somebody doing something they didn't do or saying something they didn't do, that's usually quite easily identifiable and provable. What would be more worrying would be more subtle, pervasive disinformation around election campaigns, I think. But yeah, I'm sure people are working on it, but I don't know any particularly groovy solutions right now.
Professor Liam from China, do you afraid that the AI technologies in some countries like China may use to censorship or monitor the people because it's costly, and as far as I know, Xinhua and such big tycoons, they own company, they buy this technology. And there was rumors on the market, the Chinese government want to buy all the shares the Naspers owned in Tencent. So what's your idea?
Yeah, you probably know more about it than I do, Liam. I teach journalism, of course, at LSE, and a couple of Chinese students did an amazing presentation last week, in fact, showing how their social media was monitored by the state. It was a rather brave presentation, actually. Considering they have to go back to China at some point. And it did show that where there's a will, there's a way. You can use these technologies in a very, very pervasive way, as is happening in China, partly with the reason for, you know, around COVID. So that's the kind of excuse, if you like, that's being used by the state. And it is turning into this surveillance state. And it's pretty effective. You know, it seems well done, China. It seems to be quite effective, very expensive and extensive as well. And that's deeply worrying. It's why I don't work at all with anybody in China. And, you know, there are obviously other authoritarian actors and other bad actors around the world. It's not just about China who are using exactly this same technology. And, you know, we'd have to be incredibly naive to think that somehow these technologies are not going to be used in the same way that all other technologies. You know, we thought back in 2010 that social media was going to help with the Arab Spring. Facebook was a wonderful force for good. Do you remember those days when Facebook was a wonderful force for freedom? And of course, it turns out that it's not. And that there are serious problems around, for example, the way that Facebook changes algorithms, the way that Facebook does not devote resources to most of the world and so on. And doesn't even know what's happening on its various platforms and networks. So, you know, I think when we talk about worrying about surveillance, we can see a very deliberate, conscious example in China. But I think we should also be very worried about the way that these technologies have a kind of infrastructural influence everywhere in the world, you know. So I don't think it's just about hating on China.
My name is Isaac Manar. You made a reference to that journalists and newsrooms should review their ethical codes and editorial codes. I wonder if you can talk a bit more about examples and how should the codes be adjusted to make provision for AI in newsrooms?
Yeah, thanks, Isaac. That's a really interesting issue. It's been right there from the beginning of our project, where we asked people, you know, why are you worried about this AI thing? And it was interesting. One of the key issues that journalists said to us immediately was the independence one, the one I've just been talking about. Who owns the technology? You know, that's a big ethical issue, which is, you know, if we're going to start using their data sets, if we're going to start using their algorithms, are we surrendering our editorial autonomy, our control over our work? And then there were sort of specific concerns about things like bias and so on. I think there are also specific issues for newsrooms in terms of transparency, for example. You know, if you've got a wonderful bit of AI and it's writing your stories, well, for some stories, perhaps it doesn't matter. I had a wonderful example about at a conference a week ago where a German newspaper had really gone for it. Fantastic work using AI across their editorial processes. And the editor said to me, the one bit we don't worry about is horoscopes. We now automate our horoscopes because horoscopes were bullshit in the first place. So it doesn't matter if the AI can say whatever it wants because we all know it's nonsense. It's just a bit of fun. I said this to a friend and they said, no, what? No. It's in the stars. This really matters. So it's always more complicated than you think. But the transparency thing I think is interesting. So, you know, if it is writing stuff or creating stuff, what do you tell your users? Or even what do you tell your journalists? If you're using AI technologies to surface related stories, for example, in your research, do you know why the algorithm is choosing those stories and not some other stories? Do you have any control over that as a journalist? And does your reader have control when they, you know, when you personalize content? You say, oh, I know where you live, so I'm going to give you content for that place, or I know what you're interested in, the sports you like, so I'm going to give you those. Do you tell the reader that? Do you give the reader any control over that process? You know, so those are all interesting kind of ethical editorial questions. I think the good news, and this is my personal opinion, firstly, you know, if you're an ethical journalist, well, that's a surprise, but that's good. But that's good. But let's not get too saintly. Journalists have not always been terribly ethical about anything. But if you are, that's great, because that means you've got experience of this. You've got used to making judgments about the quality of your work, for example, and the mission of your work. So just use those same values in relation to artificial intelligence. The other thing is that I think in some ways we should worry about it less than we think, in the sense that, you know, when I was a journalist, I used to make you know, films about stuff for the news, and I would often use APTV or Reuters TV footage. Yeah, no, it's dodgy. Yeah. Sometimes we had to, I'm sorry. But we didn't tell the audience that. The audience thought we'd filmed it all ourselves. Or I imagine they thought that. You know, we said this is a Channel 4 News video about what's happening in Ethiopia. We didn't say, oh, we got this bit of stuff from Reuters and we found this bit of stuff on the internet or something. So, you know, I'm just sort of questioning whether you have to worry about these things too much. Research seems to show that audiences aren't bothered. This is really sad if you're a human journalist, but they're not that bothered whether it comes from a machine or comes from you, for a lot of the coverage anyway. obviously for the more controversial stuff, the more opinion-y stuff, then it does matter. And the good news as well is that, for example, we've got a team that work with us from Bavarian Public Radio in Germany. And they've developed a newsroom ethics code for AI, and it's fantastic. It's full of common sense, it's very practical and helpful, and that's the one I would recommend. Other people are also developing codes. Indeed, AP are working on a kind of ethics code, a part of kind of newsroom, kind of what you call news guidelines for journalists and so on. And that's how I think it should be seen. There are aspects that are particular to AI technology, but most of them are quite practical issues that relate to editorial topics that you're probably already familiar with. But yeah, Bavarian Radio is ein wunderbarer Dokument.
Well, I'm going to yield to this for the last question here.
I'll be quick. Go on, pass the mic down. Give him the mic. Give the man the mic.
Sorry. Okay, sir. Hi, I'm Stanley Gahete, correspondent of CNN Philippines.
Okay.
You said earlier that AI, artificial intelligence, is not everything. But becoming, of course, adaptive to technology is very important nowadays. We did not expect that print will become weaker before, then now broadcast because of the new media. And journalism survived before without AI. So my question is, since AI is quote-unquote another layer of advancement, which is also important for us, can we survive the future? Can journalism survive the future without artificial intelligence?
Can it survive without it? Yeah, it can. I don't think AI is, what's the word? It's definitely a game changer. It's definitely a game changer, but it's not necessarily the result, to pursue the metaphor. That we can continue doing our journalism. And as I said, I keep referring to this paradox around AI, that the more AI there is in your life, the more important the human element is going to be in your journalism. A company like Bloomberg, for example, which obviously is a hugely data-driven financial services type newsroom, I think about 50% of their content is now generated automatically using these technologies, because a lot of it is, company reports, share updates, that kind of stuff. And that's fantastic. And if you look at Bloomberg, it was quite interesting. Their editorial business model has shifted. They are doing more human type journalism. They're doing more analysis. They're doing more kind of human interest stuff, actually, in Bloomberg terms anyway. They're doing more stuff about your career, for example. So they are, and I'm not saying it's an editorial decision what you do with the resources that you save. It could be you just fire a bunch of people. Unlikely, because you still need a whole new bunch of people who understand the AI, can edit the AI. So you're getting all these new job descriptions. Go and look at the job pages. They're now things like, audience data manager, engagement editor, algorithm supervisor, and these are still editorial roles, but they're now related to AI. So there are new things that you're going to have to do in newsrooms as well. But that's my hope, is that, and we can see it so strongly with investigative journalism. When we think of something, the things like the Pandora leaks and so on, that would have been impossible to have done that investigation without AI assistance. You just couldn't have combed through all those data sets manually. They would still be working on that story if they didn't have this technology. However, it was the judgment of the journalists who said, okay, they've surfaced this really interesting evidence. What does it mean? Why is it important? How can we turn this into brilliant journalism. So that is my hope, that the AI augments and superpowers the human journalists to do their work. Thanks.
Charlie, just a really quick, like 30-second question. Do you think we could replace this gentleman who's doing the illustrations over here with AI?
Well, he's using it. He's actually using it because some of this is
Right.
I mean, he's a human genius, but he's also using it. So there you go. And thank you very much for your work.
Thank you, Charlie. Okay. All right. I think we have a quick break, and then we will continue with the rest of the program.